All right, what is up, folks? Welcome back to another episode of the Help Me Understand podcast. I'm your host, Coach JK McLeod, and today we are going to be talking all about menopause, and I'm going to be coming at it from the angle of talking directly to men. So this one, according to the statistics and the analytics that I get from the podcasting platform that I use for Help Me Understand, this particular topic is going to be something that will, while it applies to the majority of my audience, the majority of the audience that is reported to listen to this show is primarily female. I want to say it's 75 to 80%, somewhere around there, which would leave then, if I understand math, the way I think I do, 20 to 25% being male audience. While this particular topic relates to the majority of the audience, I'm taking a bit of a different spin, and I'm going to envision that I'm talking to a room full of men, and specifically men who have female partners, men who work with females, men who still are interacting with females, all basically any dude who talks to or cares about or cohabitates with a female. I think I've pretty much covered just about everything there. That is who I, for the sake of keeping things somewhat organized here, am specifically talking to with this episode. Now, before you, who may be a female, says, well, I guess he's not talking to me today, pause, and I would hope that you do still listen to today's episode, because there are going to be things that I will discuss that I'm certainly open to getting your feedback and your perspective on whether you think I'm on the right path with the information that I'm communicating, or on the wrong path, or somewhere in between, or any particular things that you think that I may have missed or that I nailed. So basically, I hope that you don't just turn this episode off or scroll to the next episode of a different podcast, specifically because I opened with saying, hey, I'm coming from the perspective of talking directly to men. So hopefully I haven't lost you there. So, however, though, before getting into more of today's episode, I first, as always, want to say thank you for choosing to press play on the Help Me Understand podcast. I know that you have a lot of different podcasts that you can consume, so I truly never take it for granted that you chose to press play on Help Me Understand. I would sincerely appreciate it if this particular episode impacts you in any way, shape, or form, that you could hop onto your favorite podcasting platform. This one will also be posted on YouTube, and leave either a rating, like, review, whatever combination is available to you on that particular platform. And reminder, if you are listening on Spotify, there is now a spot where you can leave comments about episodes on Spotify too. So I would appreciate that. All right, so let's get into the meat of today's episode. So this one is going to be all about helping men understand what menopause actually is. And my intention is not to pretend that I'm going to present this from the aspect of trying to replace a textbook. I am specifically wanting to bring the perspective of being a coach who works primarily with women every day. And for a clarification standpoint, I don't market myself as a coach who only works with women. That is just what has happened to be the primary demographic that I work with, just to make that clear. So, guys, I want you to understand that it's not your job to become an expert in hormones. However, I do believe that if you live with, you love, or you work alongside with women, you need to understand the hormonal shifts that are shaping this particular phase of life. I don't believe that menopause is just a female health topic. I think that it can be a relationship topic, which means that it can be a communication topic, which means that, especially with it being a relationship topic, it's something that is certainly a support topic. So first, let's start off with, for men, why should you care? Like, why does this matter? So if you are a dude who has ever said or thought before, like, man, I do not get what's going on with her lately, it must just be your hormones, or you know how she is, like, real talk, like, this is how dudes get sometimes, where we shouldn't say they, we use phrasing like, yeah, it just must be your hormones, must be that time of the month, whatever it may be. I'm here to hopefully be able to just give you some real talk about what's actually happening so that you are not just ignorantly using phrases that you don't really understand what's actually behind there. So that is my intention here. So as a coach who works with primarily women in their 30s, 40s, 50s, and well beyond, I want to let you know that this is a conversation that comes up very often. A lot of the times, many of the changes that men are noticing in the women in their lives, and I will preemptively say too that a significant part of my bias for this is going to be as, again, a coach and also as a husband. So I'm really, if we were to drill it down to, hey, who are you specifically talking to? I would say the primary individual that I'm picturing in front of me right now is a husband, life partner, anything like that with a female in their life. So I just want to let you know that this is something that does come up very often. And a lot of the times, many of the changes that you guys are noticing in the women in your lives, things like a change in more significant fatigue, you are potentially noticing more irritability. You're noticing perhaps like reduced motivation, maybe even reduced sex drive. You're noticing body composition. All of those things can be linked to hormonal transitions that are happening. But because it's not talked about openly towards men, it often, in my opinion, is getting brushed off or completely misunderstood. And the reason that I put some extra emphasis in saying that it's not talked about openly towards men is because, one, from my point of view, women, especially perimenopausal and menopausal women, and I'll go into you explaining to you what those different stages are and the difference between perimenopause and menopause. That particular demographic is the primary target for so much marketing in fitness and health and wellness and nutrition and anything that's like broadly related to that. If you are a perimenopausal or menopausal woman who is listening to this particular episode, I believe that you totally get where I'm coming from. And something that came up in my private client group chat was when I presented this, I presented something to them a couple of weeks ago. I can't remember what I was saying. I had joked about something that I saw, and one of my clients had said, man, just be glad that you're not a menopausal woman because it was something about my YouTube feed. And they said, be glad that you're not a menopausal woman because if you saw what was in my YouTube feed, like it would just be a lot, just paraphrasing. And I was like, man, actually, the funny thing is because of the different topics that I research in order to support my clients and write training programs and things like that, YouTube has got it like all messed up where it thinks that I may possibly be a perimenopausal or menopausal woman because I get YouTube videos about weighted vests. I get YouTube videos, like an incessant number of YouTube videos in my algorithm about how to lose weight. I get things on fat loss. I get things about what else is there? Steps, walking pads. Now I'm starting to get more and more stuff on GLP-1s, which I'll be doing an episode about a research review within the next couple of weeks. I'll probably cover that topic. But needless to say, and I get things about like clothing hauls with Amazon leggings and Lululemon dupes and stuff like that. So I periodically have to go through and completely, basically like purposely search out other stuff so that my algorithm doesn't keep feeding me these things. So all that to say, guys, this I don't believe is being talked about directly to you, hardly at all, unless it's something that you just happen to catch on the periphery or it's something that your wife, your girlfriend, your fiance, whatever is sharing with you. Unless you are really openly seeking this stuff out, it's likely not something that you're ever going to get at the level of detail that I'll talk to you about it. Okay. So just wanted to give you a heads up on that. And I've experienced this myself also, where I've had male friends who have mentioned like, man, I just don't know what's going on with her these days. Like she's, she said she's like, it's just her hormones, but I don't really know what that is. That happens. That is not a one-off. Like I will hear that periodically from other guys within kind of my age group. So again, that's really why I wanted to get into this. All right, so let's go ahead and get into the topic, like the main stuff here. So first, what is menopause? So there's four primary, like distinct stages of the menopause transition. And I think that's something that even right off the bat is helpful for guys to understand, is that menopause is not like this thing that just flips. Like it's not a light switch that just flips on and off. It is a progression that can stretch and likely will stretch over several years. So I would think of it more like dimmer a dimmer for a light switch, or excuse me, a dimmer instead of like an on off switch. Or if you think of like a thermostat, and when you're changing the temperature, you change the thermostat, but it doesn't just all of a sudden go from like 65 to 70 real quick. It's got to take time for that particular temperature to change. And especially if you have different areas in the house, like right now, I'm in my basement, which we can set the thermostat that's in our living room at a certain temperature, but it takes a while for the basement to necessarily adjust to that temperature, which is different than the living room, which is different than our upstairs level. So that is something that you do need to understand. The four different stages that I'm going to talk about, it doesn't happen like okay, we were at this particular stage January through March, and then in April, that it just flipped on April 1st. We moved from premenopause to perimenopause. It's definitely not the way that it goes. So let's talk about the four stages. And the four stages that we're going to talk about are going to be premenopause, perimenopause, menopause, and then postmenopause. All right. And again, as I mentioned earlier, the majority of the messaging and the targeted marketing is going towards women that are within the perimenopause to menopause phase. Like that's pretty much like the marketing sweet spot right now. There's a myriad of reasons for that. I would say that primarily, I have not researched this in quite some time. I do know though that I would say within like the last couple of years, the messaging that's been given to me as a coach is that that's going to be the demographic that typically has access to the disposable income to be able to pay for solutions to their quote unquote problem. So just do with that what you will. So four stages. So first, let's talk about pre-menopause. So this is a very regular reproductive stage of life. There are hormones like estrogen and progesterone that are going to follow a monthly cycle. So those two particular hormones are going to follow a monthly cycle. You'll find that typically when somebody is in pre-menopause, their energy, their mood, and their body composition are generally more predictable. So for the most part, you probably won't notice anything different. And this tends to be the baseline that most men are familiar with. So guys, when a female is saying something along the lines of, you know, man, I just can't seem to recover like I used to. I can't seem to, my body just doesn't seem to react to certain things the way that it used to. Many times what I'm finding is that men are thinking about that from the aspect of environment that was different back then. So say for instance, your wife is in her 40s and she's talking to you about, man, I used to do these workouts in my 20s and it was totally fine. Or I used to, be able to drink like a champ. And then I definitely can't recover the same way. Like I went out for girls' night for margaritas on a Thursday and now Friday I am dead to the world. I can't recover like I used to. You likely, based on the conversations that come my way, are thinking about it from the aspect of, well, yeah, that seems like common sense because you're looking at it from your perspective of, yeah, you can't do the same things that you did in college. You got responsibilities, you have kids, you've got things that you need to do. Yes, that is true. And also, there are hormonal changes that make that recovery process from a night of alcohol or the recovery process from a particularly stressful day more challenging. Okay, so that's something to understand. So many times in the conversations that I'm having or comments that I'm getting with men when they're listening to their partner talk about how difficult it is to recover from certain things or keep training the same way. I used to be able to run 5-6 days a week and also, work out with my team and all these other things. We're thinking about it from the aspect of environmental changes. And while that is 100% true, because I'm certainly not here to say that all of a sudden, like, all hope is lost. That's definitely not the case. And any women who've worked with me understand that that's not my bag at all. What I do want you to understand is that there are hormonal changes that need to be taken into account as we transition. Okay, so that's premenopause. All right, then the next stage is going to be perimenopause. So with perimenopause, this is something that generally begins as early as the late 30s to early 40s. There are for sure going to be nuances, one-offs, and different cases here. In fact, I know of a couple of, actually, I'm jumping the gun here, but I know of a couple of individuals who actually went from perimenopause into menopause in their early 30s. So they were in perimenopause a very short period of time and immediately, or not immediately, but based on some medical conditions, transitioned into menopause fairly quickly. So understand that when I am giving you particular age ranges, that these are general age ranges. Everybody is going to be different. And also, I'm just trying to give you enough to at least have a better understanding or more perspective on what's actually happening. Okay, so again, perimenopause, that can start as early as your late 30s to early 40s, I think I said. All right, so what happens in this particular phase is that hormones are going to start to fluctuate. So what you may find is estrogen may spike or drop suddenly, and then progesterone begins to decline. So those particular two hormones, that's where we start to see things not as rhythmic. So you'll find that their cycles will become irregular. You'll also find that particular symptoms of that cycle becoming irregular. This is where generally you'll start to understand that your partner is experiencing mood swings. You'll see things and experience things like poor sleep and even hot flashes. So that's where this can begin to really form in the perimenopause phase, and then also an increased amount of anxiety. So these are some things where when those particular hormones, or excuse me, when particularly estrogen and progesterone are starting to change, then that's where you can start to see some of these particular symptoms beginning to happen. So the woman that you may typically know as fairly consistent and, for the most part, very predictable and driven, you may start to notice that she feels a little bit more sensitive to certain things that you say or do. You may notice that it just seems like that sense of overwhelm comes on a bit more quickly. And you may just notice that, again, like the normal rhythm that you were used to, it becomes a little bit more inconsistent. So that's what I want you to know about perimenopause. So then from perimenopause, and again, that's generally from late 30s to early 40s, then she is going to transition into menopause. So menopause generally is officially marked by having 12 months without a menstrual period. So again, once a female has gone 12 months without a menstrual period, that generally is like the officially accepted understanding of, okay, this is the beginning of menopause. So remember how I was saying it's not like flip a switch. It's more of a dimmer or a change in the temperature. It's the thermostat that you've got to wait for different rooms to catch up. That's basically what happens. And the average age tends to be around 50-ish. And again, I say ish in general and things like that, just because there is no shortage of different examples of people who have transitioned through different phases earlier or later than others. And this is where the two hormones, estrogen and progesterone, will drop sharply. So this is where you start to notice an increase of those symptoms that were presenting themselves in perimenopause. That's where you start to really notice in menopause, if you haven't like totally picked up on things there. So a lot of the symptoms start to really intensify. This is where, depending on where lifestyle factors are, and I'll talk about this in more near the end, but depending on where lifestyle factors are, weight gain becomes more of a prevalent issue, especially around the midsection. Sleep disturbances, really, really noticing that the quality of sleep declines. That definitely happens. Also, low libido. So again, a lot of these, you'll notice that a lot of these things are things that I mentioned in the perimenopause section. However, they're starting to intensify and be more of a regular thing. And when I say regular thing, you're just noticing it's more and more that these particular symptoms are presenting themselves. And then brain fog. That's definitely something that in working with women within this particular demographic and age bracket for a little over a decade now, you do tend to notice that also. So what happens is what used to work for her, whether it's a workout plan or a nutrition routine, might not be working now. And from the woman's point of view, that's something that can feel super frustrating or even discouraging. And I also, as I'm going through this, I want to make sure that I'm truly doing my best to present this from my point of view as a coach versus speaking for women. So just throwing that out there too. All right. So after we go through premenopause, perimenopause, and then menopause, now we are transitioning into post-menopause. So post-menopause, this is the phase after that particular 12-month marker that we've gone through. Your hormones, or the female's hormones, are going to remain low. However, they remain stable. So they stay at that low point. So you may find that symptoms, the things that we talked about, sleep disturbances, lower libido, weight gain, some of the brain fog, you may notice that they start to ease a bit, or they may shift, or they might even like still continue to persist. So that can be very difficult too. And I think a lot of how those particular symptoms are being managed in perimenopause and menopause have a lot to do with what happens post-menopause. So this, though, is where, and especially remember, we're talking like generally beyond the age of 50 here. This is where things like bone density loss, muscle loss, and joint pain, like joint issues, this is where this stuff becomes more and more noticeable. So again, as guys, we're thinking, yep, this is just stuff that happens with age. And yes, you're not incorrect. Some of these things are things that happen with age. And also, there needs to be an understanding that hormones play a role in this too. So understand that. So at this point, when someone has moved into postmenopause, the focus here really shifts more towards long-term health. Really, so basically staying strong, really trying to protect joints, and then just maintaining mobility and independence. Those are the things that we're really focused on. So again, just to recap, 4 stages of menopause. There's premenopause, perimenopause, menopause, and then postmenopause. So those, my friends, are your 4 stages of menopause. So I do want to go back and just address the change in the hormones, because there's 3 primary hormones. I know I kind of brushed through this a bit, or brushed over that part a bit, but I do want to go back just to give you a little bit more detail. I've got a few bullet points that I put together on each of the main hormones that are going to be shifting during this time. So the first one is going to be estrogen. So this is the primary female sex hormone. And what estrogen does is it's going to regulate things like menstrual cycles, body temperature, bone health, brain function, and even, I believe, even cholesterol is going to be affected by estrogen. So what happens is when estrogen drops, those are the things, that's the thing that starts to impact temperature regulation. So this is what leads to hot flashes. So this is where you will find that sleep begins to be disrupted, and for sure will affect mood. So that is estrogen. That's the primary sex hormone. Then you've got progesterone. So progesterone a lot of times is called the calming hormone. So progesterone works to try and balance estrogen. So progesterone will support restful sleep and emotional regulation. So the tricky thing is that progesterone generally declines earlier than estrogen. And that's where, when that's happening, that can lead to increased anxiety, trouble sleeping, and more emotional, for lack of a better term, more emotional volatility, just a lot more unpredictable there. So that's something that I want to point out. Keep in mind here that this whole idea of the dimmer versus the light switch really comes into play. And that's a analogy that's used within the fitness space quite often. It's not a switch, it's a dimmer. It's a great one. My coach, Jeff, my previous coach, used to use that analogy with me in a couple of areas. And then I know a couple other coaches who talk about that. So I think that can be a good analogy in multiple areas. However, here, when we're talking about hormones specifically, keep in mind that even though we are talking big picture, that the different phases of menopause are like a dimmer versus a light switch, also understand that those different hormones that are shifting and changing are not all moving at the same rate at all. So as I just mentioned, progesterone will typically decline, just generally decline earlier than estrogen. So it's not as if one is going to move at the same rate of the other, if that makes sense. So that is one of the reasons why sometimes there are coaches who definitely are like, when you talk about balancing hormones, what do you mean balance hormones? And sometimes that can be a bit of an argument within the functional, we'll call it like the functional health space. So when you hear people arguing back and forth of like, somebody says, hey, I can help you balance your hormones. And then another coach says, well, what do you mean balance hormones? Because they're not all going to be at the same level. That is the argument that those folks are having. And I don't typically get into that particular argument. I'm just here to provide you with an understanding of kind of what's happening behind the scenes. All right. So we covered estrogen, we covered progesterone. Now let's cover testosterone. And yes, women have testosterone too, just in smaller amounts than men generally. So what testosterone does is it helps to support libido. It can be something that helps to support your motivation, and then also muscle mass and strength. So what happens is, as testosterone drops, you may see lower drive, just lower overall motivation drive, lower overall sex drive, and also recovery becomes a bit more difficult. So it can also contribute to fatigue and that kind of like blah feeling that women will sometimes describe. So keep that in mind. So those are your three. You've got estrogen, you've got progesterone, and then you've got testosterone. So those are going to be your three main hormones that we are talking about. Okay. So we've gotten through the science end of things, and now here's what I directly want men to really understand. And I really believe that I've got to get this out of the way. Your job is not to solve menopause for your partner. As much as you may care, this is not your job. Your job is to not make something that is and I'm going to use the verbiage that my clients have used with me. Your job is to take something that is already hard and not make it harder than it already is. That's your job. And I'm using the phrasing that my clients presented me when I asked them, hey, does anybody have any suggestions about things I can present from your point of view? So what is something that you would like to say? And I also posted this in my Instagram story. The overall way that I could paraphrase it is, the thing that dudes need to understand is, one, it's not their job to solve what's happening. And two, we don't understand what's happening either. So we as your wife, we as your mom, we as your whatever, we also don't understand what's happening completely, or we can't predict exactly when certain things are going to happen either. We are also working through this process. So I just wanted to take a minute to point that out, just because I believe that it can be very easy, guys, for us to think like, okay, well, now that I know this, like, here's what I'm going to do to fix it. And let me give you actually some examples of, I jotted down some like what not to do. So one, don't downplay her experience with, man, it's just her stress and it's just her hormones. Like, that's probably just it. Try not to do that. Also, there's really no need to ever offer unsolicited advice. And I, as a husband, could do well to remember this a bit more often. So don't offer unsolicited advice like, well, have you tried cutting carbs? Maybe you should do intermittent fasting. Just leave that alone. My general advice, just for the most part for dudes, is if your advice is needed, it will either be asked for, or if you ask, hey, is this something where you're just wanting to get this off your chest, or would you like my point of view on this? You can also do that, and you will likely get a pretty straightforward response on there. So just not offering unsolicited advice. I cannot tell you the number of times where I've had a conversation with, whether it's my client, somebody in a group program, or somebody in between, or just a general person at the gym, where they've said, hey, my husband told me that they did this and it worked for them. What do you think about that? And I will routinely then respond with, well, what sort of symptoms were you presenting that they offered a solution for? So I'm going to find a way to move that conversation back to your wife, your girlfriend, your fiance, your aunt, your mom, whoever it is who's asking me that question. I'm going to find a way to move the shift away from trying to figure out, well, I'm not sure why he would suggest that. What's he got going on? What's he doing? I'm going to shift it to, well, what problem did you present, or what symptom, because those are two different things, did you present that they were trying to offer a solution for? And then we'll try and unpack it that way. And then the last thing that I jotted down in my what not to do, guys, don't assume that she's quote unquote just being moody, or don't assume that all of a sudden she has become lazy out of nowhere. There are things, again, there are internal things that are happening. This whole episode, or the majority of this episode, I've talked to you about the shift that's happening. And it's not just that all of a sudden somebody has become lazy. There are things that they are working through. There are literal, like, internal things happening that they are working their way through. So here's what you can do instead. You can ask a question. You can ask questions from the aspect of curiosity and not judgment. Real simple. Is there something I can help you out with right now? Or is there something I could help with right now? Let me rephrase that a little bit better. So is there something I could help you with right now? You can support her in adapting her training instead of just telling her that she needs to push harder. There is enough messaging that's out there for both men and women, however, specifically women, that they need to work harder. They should just be doing more, and more. And it's easy for us as guys to kind of sit on the sideline and be like, yeah, you just need to do more. But that may not necessarily be the case. So if you are finding that your wife has shifted her training, get curious about it in a way that is truly curious and truly supportive of that, versus what I sometimes will hear, and not even just from the woman. I will literally overhear a guy talking to female friend, wife, whatever the case may be, and they'll be, I've noticed this a few times, where an ear hustled or overheard. The guy will make some sort of a comment like, so you're just kind of backing off, taking it easy now? Or, yeah, I think it's a good idea that you're not working out like as much. You were starting to really become a class A beat. Stuff like that. Like, that's the stuff that's not helpful at all. So again, kind of back to the beginning of what I was talking about with what men need to understand. There even are aspects where, and I would say this would be more along, yeah, this is just direct talk. Let me just go there. Many times it's the best way that you can support is just completely like get out of the way. So it's not about you being able to provide permission for your wife to, change what her training style is, or permission for her to invest in this different style of eating or invest even in coaching. If that's something that she wants to do, it's about just staying out of the way for some people. I will say for some people, because there are times where for sure, as partners, we are sabotaging a particular process and we're just making things more difficult than they really need to be or already may be. And all right, let me stay back on track. So one other thing that you can do is understand that your partner, your wife, your coworker, whoever it is, their physical, mental, and emotional needs might look different. And I want to be super clear on this. This is not something that, like, menopause and the different stages of menopause are not something that make women weaker. This is a part of the process. This doesn't make a woman weaker. It just makes her human. So just need to understand that. So I hope that the overall tone of this is coming across again as more of, hey, here's what's going on. Here's what you can do to support now that you potentially have some perspective and information that you didn't have before. And it doesn't mean that your wife has all of a sudden become some unpredictable, unmanageable, uncontrollable weakling. That could not be further from the truth, despite the fact that a lot of the marketing seems to be trying to push that message to women, like telling them all of a sudden now everything needs to be like gentle and all that jazz. So, all right. So just really understand that this is the part of where, being like a partner or a teammate as opposed to a fixer is really going to come in. You're not there to coach her unless she actually asks for it. You're there specifically just to hold space and stay consistent when things feel unpredictable for her. So that is both from my perspective and also perspectives that have been given to me from women. The best thing that you can do is stay consistent and stay as predictable as you can. Okay. All right. So let's finish out with just a few general fitness and lifestyle tips that will actually help, because if you're in her corner, whether you are the partner, the friend, maybe even you are the coach, here are some different strategies that can support her well-being during this particular transition. So I don't think any of these will come as a shock, but here's a reminder. So first, and these aren't in any particular order, first, strength training 2 to 3 times a week seems to be the sweet spot, and really want to focus on that because it'll help preserve and or build muscle and also protect bone density. Second, and again, not in any particular order, walking and then low impact movement. It's something that these are things that I believe are important to focus on because they help with stress and overall mood. Also can be helpful with digestion, some aspects of insulin sensitivity, and cortisol regulation also. And let me quick note on the cortisol regulation thing. There's also a lot of noise, I'm going to call it, around cortisol being the thing. Like, cortisol is the massive problem that you need to fix. And from my point of view, the verbiage there can be a bit misleading. Cortisol is something that should be elevated at certain times. So when I was actually talking to one of my clients, and they were telling me that they had gone through a particular period in their life, and they're like, yeah, I just, I'd really my problem was my cortisol was elevated. And as we were talking about it, what they were, I'm not going to say they were incorrect. It's just they didn't necessarily have all the information that they needed to make that particular judgment. So when it comes to cortisol being spiked at the wrong time is more of a problem than just simply saying I have elevated cortisol. So where your cortisol, that stress piece, should be a bit higher is when you wake up in the morning. Your cortisol will be higher, should be higher than it is when you go to bed. When you do a strength training workout, your cortisol should be higher than it is when you go to bed. Cortisol is essentially something that you want to be there and be active when you need it. And the times that you don't, you want it to chill. So things like drinking copious amounts of caffeine throughout the day, you might be able to go to sleep, but cortisol levels might be still elevated. So even though you're sleeping, the quality of said sleep is pretty piss poor. All right, I'm going to get off that for a minute and go back to my list. So we've got strength training, walking and low impact movement, a protein intake. This is something that's going to become even more important because that will help with maintaining lean muscle mass. So your muscle mass, that'll help. Protein will help with that. Sleep hygiene is something that's really important too. So this is something that you can do to assist if you're trying to figure out, like, coming to an agreement on what the temperature is going to be, what bedtime is going to be, trying to support that partner with less screen time before bed. So I'm talking specifically at this point, I'm talking to like dudes who are in relationships with females. Like if you're a coworker, I don't know that you need to be all up in your female coworkers' sleep hygiene business. Like that's for a separate episode. So just keeping those particular things in mind, sleep hygiene becomes much, much, much more important. And then, as I kind of alluded to earlier, stress management definitely matters more now than ever. Basically, elevated cortisol at the wrong times can really just make every symptom worse than it already is. So just keep that in mind. So understand, as we're closing out here, you're not expected to always fix things, or you're not expected to fix this situation. I cannot stress that enough. It's about being a supportive partner. Your wife, your girlfriend, your fiance, as they are moving through these stages, they are not sick. This is not something where they are all of a sudden like weak and destitute. I cannot stress that enough. These are natural changes that they are experiencing and going through, and the importance of a supportive partner, the importance of consistency outside of these particular changes that are happening. That's the stuff that really makes the difference. So you don't always have to have the right words, but showing up means more really than having the perfect advice. Like, just try and be as consistent as you can with what you're doing. Occasionally just asking, like, what do you need? And just be okay with listening without feeling like you have to completely fix something, and offer support when asked for without making assumptions too. So really try and do that. And understand, and this is where a lot of this is coming again from the feedback from the people who answered my Instagram story and also my clients. The smallest efforts, like even the smallest thing about just learning what she's actually working through, will be helpful in showing that you care. So that's something that can be helpful too. So think about these particular things. Understand that there are going to be some phases where your wife, your partner, they may not have a great understanding of what exactly is happening. And they're just trying to work through it. So the best thing that you can do is just be there and be available to help with working through it. Menopause it's a long transition, and it impacts things physically, mentally, and emotionally. So understand that. And last but certainly not least, just understand that the women in your life, like, they're not being dramatic or making excuses. They're navigating through very, very real physiological shifts right now. So these are all the things in this episode. I've covered most of the things. I'm sure I'll think of something as soon as I hit stop. But these are the things that I believe you should know about the different phases of menopause, and maybe even more importantly, the things that you potentially can do to be a supportive partner. All right. So with that, thank you for listening to another episode of the Help Me Understand podcast. I certainly hope that this has been helpful in some way, shape, or form, or better yet, impactful in some way, shape, or form. Definitely open to your feedback. I would appreciate if you pass this particular episode on to a friend, family member. Ladies, if you're listening and feel like this would be helpful for any of the men in your life, please definitely pass it on to them. Statistics say that this is an episode that's not going to get listened to as much, based on how I started it off with saying I'm primarily talking to men. However, I just believe it was important enough to bring up. So if there's something that I missed, if there's something that maybe I was totally off base, I'm definitely open to that feedback. And as always, thank you so much for listening. I appreciate you. Take care, and I'll talk to you next time.